think I'm even more proud or happy to be here, seeing what this conference is about, to be honest. I think I learned already in a workshop and a meeting what we had that is very much a quality practitioner workshop, if you want. It's not a conference that focuses on theory, but it's a conference that focuses on doing what's really happening. So what's the market telling? Which is also, I think, my background. I like to talk from practice rather than from theory, despite having worked at university for 10 years part-time, but still very much practitioner, I believe. I also like the fact that it's all non-profit. You mentioned, Phil, already TMI and ISTQB history, and these are things you do to give something back to the community. I don't get rich from doing TMI or ISTQB, but I try to give something back. And talking about the haves and the not haves, also one of the things you talked about. I've been living in Bonaire, which is the Caribbean, for over 10 years now. And I recognize very much also the not have on our island or neighboring islands. So it's very, very rewarding to be able to be a consultant in these areas and give something back to them on testing, on QA, on all things that we all know, but for them is often totally new. So this very much relates to I think, your view, our view, and being part of the conference. So thank you very much for sharing. Okay, building on success beyond the obvious. I've been in IT for over 25 years, so I think I don't have the history of the conference yet, but I have a history, many years in testing, in QA as well. So what I will do in this presentation is look back over the years and say, what are the things or my projects that I think were successful? What are the things that I would recommend for each and every one of you to have a look at? I could be very obvious, and I could talk about test automation or things that we all talk about. So I looked at a little bit different. Looking back at my projects, sit back and think, what happened? What made the difference? I'm not talking about being the best tester ever or winning a gold medal at the Olympics, but doing things that matter and being good enough in most of your projects. That's my talk going to be about for the next 45, 1 hour or so. And let me start by sometimes people say, what's this slide? It's the end of the conference. I was at a talk by a Mr. James Whittaker, some of you may know him, at one of the STAR conferences, and he explained that in his view, very soon, I think this talk was about 2 or 3 years ago, there will be no more testers. And he had a story behind that about beta testing and the like. That was his view. And people usually forget the story, but remember the headline, no more testers. I was at a conference in Australia where Elizabeth Henderson, very famous, I think, in the Agile world, talked, and also had a talk about that everyone should be the same and we have teams. And she said, I think very soon there will be no more testers. Again, people forget the storyline, but the headline is still no more testers. I was at a talk in the Netherlands recently where Rini van Solingen, professor in the Netherlands, talked about DevOps. And again, he had the same storyline, but message was no more testers. Let me share my story. And let's, at the end, look whether I believe no more testers is indeed true, or that we have a different story or different message to share. Maybe you recognize some of this, but these are the things I see in my projects. I see testers struggling, and I see projects struggling. Also today, after so many years of doing QA, of doing testing, of doing development, of doing Agile, of doing DevOps, of doing whatever. First of all, what we're seeing is, I think, IT as a discipline has a very different status than 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and even further back. It is today critical for business success. And we're in an era, people call that digital transformation. So basically, organizations depend on IT. IT determines whether you're successful in a business or not. At the same time, being so important, we see that the systems we are being built are growing and growing and growing, getting bigger. I read a survey, some research from Philips the other day, stating that the amount of software in consumer products, TV sets, and whatever you've got in your home, all 5, is doubling every 2 years. So think about that. Every 2 years, your TV set has twice as much software. So we're building systems, not just IT systems like software system, but in general, everywhere software, it's growing. It's getting more complex. We have challenges, I think, in adopting new technologies, which I think some people love, and testers like, oh, no new technologies. We are testing today not just one system, but almost all the time a group of systems that seem to interface together or should interface together. And we call it with a nice term, system of systems. When we produce an app, it has to work on Huawei, on an iPad, on a Samsung, in different browsers, in different operation systems. Good luck. I'm sure many of you have come across security, a big issue. In the Caribbean, in Europe, in China, in the States. All these things are testing challenges. All of these are, I would say, quality challenges, QA challenges. Sometimes people outsource, still popular, still growing. But outsourcing also means at some point things come back, need to be tested. And outsourcing doesn't mean you get quality back all the time. So there are many, I would think, testing challenges. And it's not like if you ask for 2 extra weeks or 2 months or 1 extra day sometimes, that you get that. No, because time to market is also critical. It needs to be done yesterday. And if you look at that people who have been researching defect density from development, you see that number of defects per, let's say, 1,000 lines of code is going down very slowly. Which is, by the way, not a comment towards development, because they also have many challenges, but a general observation. So I think no more testers. Wow, we have all these challenges, and someone's got to work on this. And this is a poster from a recent project of mine. Gib niemals auf is German. It means never give up. And to be exact, the frog.
Recording in progress.
And if you don't believe me, this is a site I'm following. It's a news site, news, not new, and it's called nu.nl. And what you see here is Dutch, so don't be afraid. That's the only Dutch you will see. But it says here all the time, software fout. And software fout means software defect. And it's very easy to find all kinds of stories about software defects of things happening. This is the world we're living in. Thousands of prisoners released too early. Why? Oh, well, software defect. 911, which in Holland is called 112. 911 was down. Why? Oh, well, software defect. We are living in a pandemic where medication and everything is very, I would think, critical. Medication shortage. Why? Software defect. And I can go on. And I even get more nervous as people know things like this. Problems, nuclear power plant. Why? Software defect. So software is everywhere, and software is critical for business success. But you can even say our lives depend on it. This is the world we are living in. Now I know that some of you would say, well, we are moving to Agile, so all this is going away. Don't get me wrong. I love Agile. I think Agile, team-based, people first over processes, despite having TMI or doing TMI, I love it. However, at the same time, Agile is not a silver bullet. Interesting enough, I think in IT, people tend to follow new, I would say, trends without actually looking at what's the trend actually about. Is it really a benefit? And this is an interesting one, I think. Maybe you're familiar with it, the annual State of Agile report. And it's already in its 14th issue. I think they released 15 recently. It shows what are the Agile benefits. And the number one, for the last few years, ability to manage changing priorities. Wow, good, much better. Improved project visibility. Wow, great. Better delivery speed, shorter time to market. Great. More motivation by the team. Perfect. Increased team productivity. Yes. But what's missing? There is no top 5 Agile benefits saying, and all of a sudden, we are way better in producing a right level of product quality or software quality. For the last so many years, this is consistently only reported by about 40% of those doing Agile. So moving to Agile is a good thing, but does not give you or guarantee more product quality automatically. An interesting topic or statement from the World Quality Report. Despite continuous growth in adoption of Agile, many organizations are still facing the same challenges as in previous years. Of course, things are getting better in Agile, don't get me wrong. And I'm a fan. I'm just saying is, do all the testing challenges go away? I don't think so. If you look at testing practices, and this is the last, you might say, somewhat almost negative slide, and I'll move to much more positive things in a minute. What you see on one hand, you have conferences, maybe not like this one, where you go to a conference and you hear about test design techniques and about test management practices, about risk-based testing and test strategies and test automation. You think, wow, all of these things are great. And you have books around that and courses about that. However, if I go to an organization, and not only in the Caribbean, but also in Europe or in China or in Asia, I often see something very different. Many conferences to me are nice talks by consultants, but it's about almost like a nice to have. Whereas many organizations are struggling. There's a talk later on about test strategy. Very interesting topic, but I come across organizations without a test strategy. They're just doing their best, but no focus. Well, why would you have this? I see sometimes people writing test plans, but when I read the test plan, I still have no clue what the approach is. But yes, it's conformed to a standard. So useless test plans. We teach test design techniques, but I come across many testers who in real life, in their day-to-day projects, don't apply concurrence partitioning, boundary value analysis, decision table testing, whatever. Or people saying, oh, we're doing exploratory testing. But then exploratory testing is used as an excuse for doing error guessing, which is something very different. I'm very much a fan of reviews. We'll talk about reviews later on. But only very few actually apply effective reviews. Test automation. It's getting better. It's way better than 5 or 10 years ago. But I also see many people and many organizations struggling. I know that many still have what I call shelfware. We bought a tool, we tried it, didn't work out, waste of money. Reusable testware, that we are writing something we can reuse across projects, Hard to find. I sometimes come across testers who've been testers for 5 years or 10 years. And this is their first training, their first true training. This is what I see. And maybe you say, well, in my organization, everything is better, and this is not. Okay, great. And of course, there are safety critical organizations. I worked in the healthcare domain a lot. And in healthcare, because of the safety critical things, and because of the FDA, things are better. But we're not all safety critical. So this is, I think, the practice versus theory, if you want. We are not using this part to the max. And the strange thing about it, if you think about it, is that despite the fact that we have all these challenges, despite the fact that we're not applying all the things that we could, we are still releasing software systems. Yes, sometimes a few months too late. Yes, sometimes budgets are overrun. Yes, sometimes a few too many defects. But the interesting thing is, and I've been in IT since '85, I said, in QA since I think 1990 or something like that. You run a project, and at the end of the project, we're too late. Too many defects. Budget's overrun. And for 10 minutes, people say, oh, wow, next time we should do better. But next time we make the same mistakes again. So apparently, good enough or being a little bit too late is okay for management. Because if it was really, really that bad, that would do something different after all these years. So it's not about, to me, it's not about winning the gold medal. It's about how to be good enough and survive, because this is what we're doing. And I would like to say, let's talk about I call that a toolbox, how to be good enough for it and survive, for agility. I don't mean agile, but agility and lean in testing. Do the things that make the difference and do them well. That's what this talk is about. And before we start with my, I think, practices, a few words again about Agile. And of course, we all know the Agile Manifesto, which has a great statements. Although in practice, I think very often not really well understood. Because individuals and over interactions, over processes and tools doesn't mean no processes. It just means the one is more important than the other. What I will do in my practice is also show you how the things that I'm proposing relate to the values of the manifesto. Because I think there are some really essential parts here. People focused. I like that. Team focused. I think the challenge always is to have just enough process. I like it that we focus on business value or working software. Documentation, only what is needed. Makes sense, right? Talk with your customer, collaborate, communicate. Because the things change over time. And don't have a detailed plan, but be able to adapt to the changes. And there are, in that sense, also some values. Communication, simplicity. Although simplicity is hard. It's an easy statement. Feedback, talk again. Important for me, when we talk about Agile, and I will talk about Agile in the next slides, is that it's having the right mindset. You might say mindset over artifacts. I come across organizations and say, we have a stand-up, so we're Agile. Do you have the right mindset? Do you understand what you're doing? Do you do the things that really matter? Is there as little waste as possible? Are you as lean as you can be? That's what this is about. Do the things that really make a difference. My first, and it's not really core practice, but I call it core practice number 0, because I think I need to understand with this, is business needs. If you want to Improve testing. If you want to improve software development, the first question I always have at any company is, how critical is software? Of course, we as testers always believe it's very critical. It's not. Yes, but talk to management. Listen to them. What's the balance between time to market and quality? Outline, discuss, maybe write some kind of, I like the idea, a quality policy or test policy, where you talk about what you expect, which non-functionals are essential for business success. Is security essential? Performance? I don't know. Is testing a profession with a career path, or is it just a role in the organization? And what's the problem? Is there an issue? Because if there's no issue and no business problem, why improve something? So the first thing to me is always when I enter a company or when I start doing some consultancy or go to a local bank or whatever, is talk with management and start talking about, okay, is there an issue? If there's an issue, what do you mean? And how important are these things? And when there's a release meeting, you sometimes say, no, you will not release because. Talk about business value of the software. Start understanding, I would think, the context. Don't focus on testing as a tester. Testing serves a business, serves a value if you want. Okay. And now for my, I would say, 5 lessons learned or 5 things I would like to give to you as things that, for me, have worked over the years. And the first thing is risk-based. Define clear testing priorities. I think we all know, or should know, that exhaustive testing is not possible. You cannot test everything. Neither in traditional, neither in DevOps, neither in whatever. So it's always about setting clear priorities. And interesting enough, testing is risk-based was already one of the principles in a book written by Bill Hetzel, I think in 1983, called The Complete Guide to Software Testing. So it's not new, but in many projects I come to, this is not really practiced well. And this is about communication, talking with customers. So it's agile if you want, because as testers, you don't know. You talk to software development, to a project manager, and find out which parts are most important to test. And again, this is about working software, because you're focusing on the things that matter most. But also, make sure you have a, I would say, method or technique for risk-based testing that is as simple as possible. Because things change, risks change, requirements change. And things I would like to talk to you about is very briefly, is product risk sessions. And sometimes that's only 15 minutes at the beginning of a sprint. And sometimes it's a bit more at the release level or whatever. And I also like to talk about risk-based test approach. Because you can say this is more important to test than some other parts. What does it mean for a tester? Does it mean just spend more time, or does it mean something else? And preferably, I would like to say, if you do risk-based testing, also do risk-based reporting. Because risk is a business language. I've seen test reports that even I do not understand. How do you expect a business manager taking a release decision to understand? I think the main focus of risk-based testing is that as a team, we are looking at, you might say, having one way of looking at our objectives. This is what we want to achieve. This is where we want to go. So it's about setting priorities. And usually it starts by identifying the risks, which is brainstorming based or requirements based, or there are different ways of doing it. The main, I would say, challenge is risk analysis. It's looking at so what's the impact? What happens if this feature, this user story fails? It could be a safety issue, healthcare. It could be that all of a sudden many people cannot do their job anymore. So how often is this feature used? It could be that for something is external visible, and you will get in the Daily Herald or whatever papers you have in the States. So on one hand, you look at impact, and on the other hand, you look at likelihood. So is it new technology being used here? How complex is it? Many interfaces to other systems, because we know interfacing is usually a source of problems. And what you see here is communication. So you will go to your stakeholders and start asking questions about these issues. And of course, impact stakeholders are those from the business. They know what is critical for the business. They know which features are used more often. But you also talk to developers, a lead developer, a project manager, a senior developer, because they will know where they're not really sure about this is new technology. We have this first time. Please help us. Risk, to me, is a function of impact and likelihood. And of course, we can talk about this much better and much more, but I think the main thing is get this right, start talking. And my goal is always, in any project I work in, is to build what I call a product risk matrix. Well, when one X, you have impact, and some people call that business risk, and the other X, you have likelihood, technical risk. And you have 4 quadrants. And some stories, user stories, requirements, features, whatever they're called, will end up in this area. Wow, high impact and high likelihood. I think these need to be tested as thoroughly as we can. For these medium ones, depends. A UAT tester may focus more on the business side of things. A unit or continuous integration tester maybe more on technical side of things. And some features are low. And low doesn't mean we will not test it. We will test it differently. And the great thing about having a product matrix, risk matrix, everyone understands this concept. This is an easy one. You can communicate about this. Remember, communication is key. These are the things I would like to see in every project. Understanding which part are more important to test and for whatever reason. And typically, this comes from a project I was involved in, testing machines like this one, pick and place machine, where we say, hey, sorry, anything in this area, we will use test design techniques. We'll review the software design. The tester will support unit testing by developing the right test cases and review unit testing. So anything in this area is tested differently than in another area. Remember, risk-based test approach. Spend the time most effective in the right part of the system. And up down here, we will do some exploratory testing. That's good enough. And of course, if we find more defects than expected, we may want to change the risk. And some things are in between. So these are things I would like to see. These are the things that work. And in that context, I always say, I like one-page test plans. I don't like IEEE 829 test plans, or nowadays called ISO 29119, I think. And you write 20 pages and you read 20 pages and you still have no clue. This is the essence. And the great thing about a one page is you can go to a copier, blow it up to a A3, put it on the wall, bang, and everyone knows the priorities. Because here you can see, hey, these are the features we are testing. These are the ones we really nervous about. These are the ones we're pretty okay with. And here we say, anything in the red part, this is our test approach. This is how we will do this. Anything in this part, this is our test approach. And in between. Because I think this is what testing is about. Getting very clear priorities, knowing where to focus, and define what it means when something is more important in other parts. You cannot say to a tester, oh, this is more important. Do your best. I have no idea what that means. Or spend some more time. I have no idea what that means. Define an approach which is different. The second thing I've very much a fan of, and I've seen working in many organizations, is reviews. I know reviews sounds very old-fashioned. Michael Fagan wrote a paper, I think in 1976, where he introduced inspections, which is even before I think the conference started, if I'm correct. But reviews are important. Again, one of the principles from I think Bill Hetzel, testing is preventing defects. And we talk today a lot about shift left. This is shifting left. Try to, I would say, look at the documentation which is still is there. The user stories which are being written. The architecture which is being developed. And perform reviews on those. But my statement is not do reviews. No. Perform limited. Why limited? Because you would not be able to do it on everything you write. You cannot do it on every part of the code, on every software design. So coming back to risk, do reviews on those parts where it really matters. And when you do reviews, make them effective. Do them in the right way. So again, this fits very much in the Agile communities, communication, because you involve external stakeholders. And to me, reviews can be part of testing. It's finding defects. It's giving feedback to people. It's working together with customers about user stories, about requirements. And you might say, again, effective means apply review practices that make the difference. I will share some on my next slide. Some people even advocate what they call Agile Inspection. And Tom Gill is one of the review, I think, gods in the world. And he talks about maybe you just take a few pages of a document and just do 2 or 3 pages and just measure the quality. It's a very different way of approaching things. It certainly is different from an organization I was involved in recently, where I got an email with a document of 75 pages, where it says, please review this. By the way, this Friday I want feedback by email. That doesn't make any sense at all, but happens in many organizations. So reviews make sense, but do it limited, focus it, and make them effective. I like the statement, it's simple. If you talk about reviews, you can explain it in 10 minutes. If you dig deeper, it requires a few days to actually understand reviews. And I've been fortunate enough to work in some organizations where I was allowed to implement reviews. And was always able to show, very defensively calculated, that we could very easily, for every $1 we put into reviews, we get a payback of at least $2. So consider there's a money machine outside. You put in $10 bill, get 20 back. That's what reviews are. That's how much money you can get from reviews. And of course, not a full course, no time for that, but some things to make you think or get you thinking. There are different types of reviews. A walkthrough is typically with the business to explain what is there and get feedback from them. That's very different from an informal inspection, where you just ask someone to look at it, or for a formal review or inspection. So there are different review types for different objectives. Have a look what's available. Don't do everything in the same way. Developers are different persons than business people. Developers are more technical people. They are able to find defects. Business people will find, let's say, validation types of comments. Very different process. And running a review and organizing it, I have learned, is not everyone's piece of cake. Trained moderators make a huge difference. Having a good meeting, an effective meeting, but also efficient meeting. Apply roles. Don't say, please review this. No, say what you expect. Why did you invite this person? Have checklists. Have a short kickoff of 10 minutes, explaining why we have the review, what's important, or what the things are, issues could be. I have learned doing reviews will get your defects up by about 15%. Entry check. If you give me a test design document and allow me to spend 30 minutes, I will tell you whether the test design document is indeed a good quality document already. Don't waste everyone's time by sending out things which are not good enough, which are not, I would say, review ready. Not too many pages. You can't review 50 pages. What will happen is people concentrate 10 pages, 20 pages, and then defect density goes down. No, not the defect density. People are bored. So about 20 pages is the max. It is really important to do more pages, split it up. Good logging rate. If you are in an inspection meeting, in a good meeting, and for an hour, that means to me, you have documented 120 defects at least. And the same with checking rate. Things like you cannot do 20 pages in 1 hour. That's like reading. So many things to say. It's not a full course, but please think reviews can have a lot of added value. Number 3. Remember, I have 5 for you in store. Risk-based testing was the first one. The second one was reviews. And the third one is unit testing. And unit testing, again, means shift left. Shift left. We don't want to find all defects at the end anymore. So get developers doing unit testing. And ask them, what are you doing? What is unit testing? I've been a developer myself. And to be honest, I did unit testing. I thought it was just running a few test cases. And I think it works. I think unit testing, and also on the next slide, is something different. And of course, unit testing again relates to working software. But also unit testing, you could think about independence. Because if you test your own software, you will make the thinking mistake twice. So independence also is applicable at unit test level, which I will show in the next slide. It's also interesting to think about things like code coverage. If you'll say, I'm doing unit testing, my quick question is, so how much of the can you say something about your coverage achieved? I have no idea. Okay. So you don't know. Okay, interesting. Body testing from XP. Working in pairs. I develop my software, my colleague tests my software, and vice versa. It's a very, very simple measure, but hugely successful. And when I talk about unit testing, many people say, oh, test-driven development. Again, I am not against test-driven development, but I see very few companies doing it. To me, by the way, it's not a testing approach, but rather a development approach. It's a different way of building software. It's a, how to put it mildly, I think it's an expensive way, but in some context, in some organizations, it pays off. But if I would say improve unit testing, my first comment would not be, let's implement test-driven development. My comment would be, let's train our developers. Let's look at code coverage. Let's look at independence, which are all much simpler to do, but in the end, make a huge difference. A very simplified unit testing process, but it shows some of the things that I think are essential. There is a software design, and a developer makes code, but I think typically a different person, a different developer can write a test code, the test cases. So a different person is doing this, XP, independence. And as a result of that very simple measure, working in pairs, you would find many, many more defects. I've seen this working many, many times. And of course, in the end, if you find a defect, functional check, you will go back to the code. And of course, also means that this tester, this developer, understands testing. He has been trained in testing. Many of us comment on developers. My question often is, has a developer been trained in testing? If the answer is no, it's not fair to comment, I think. So the first check is always on functionality. Does the code do what it's supposed to do? And the second one is, did we cover all the statements, all the decisions? So a coverage check. And if we don't get enough level of statement coverage or decision coverage, let's make more test cases, test code. Because we know from research that most system testing, UAT testing, only achieve 30 to 40% of code coverage. Why? That's another story, and we talk about it if you want. But this is what I propose. So independence, code coverage, doing the right thing, knowing what the test, being trained by it. And when I see things like continuous integration, this is from a customer of mine, that we can over time track coverage. In this case, statement, branch, method, and class coverage. And if it goes down for whatever reason, hey, what's happened here? Why is coverage going down? Who checked in this code? This is what I think delivers quality. This is a step in the right direction. People claim to me, I'm doing unit testing, but I have no clue what it means, or I have no clue about code coverage, or I'm not sure how much unit testing there is. It's just a developer doing his or her best. Because I believe most developers are really into quality. But we gotta provide them with the right resources, knowledge, and skills. Number 4, test design. Test design means use test techniques, the things we teach in courses from ISTQB and other ones, but use them in the right way. The techniques, the test design is never the objective. The objective is to write the right test cases. And again, we want to do this in a way that is as lean as possible. Some things I would like to share with you in this case is apply test design means don't lose yourself into detailed test cases all of a sudden. But first think, what do we need to test here? Based on user stories, based on the acceptance criteria from user stories. Maybe have a what I call test design startup meeting, which I think are very, very successful. Use test design techniques that are easy to understand for your stakeholders. Things like classification trees. Again, visual. Use cases. Maybe use some exploratory testing. I'm a big fan of exploratory testing, but don't use it as an excuse for error guessing. And again, doing test design means you start thinking early about testing. And early means, again, shift left. And when we talk about test design, what I mean by test design is you go through the marker, and this is what the marker says, go through your requirements, use a story, say, this is a test, this is an interesting one. Identify test conditions or test situations if you want, whatever term you want to use, I don't care. And make sure you have some kind of traceability of the requirements, because requirements change. And make it visual to everyone. So test design is about thinking, what do I need to test before going into test cases, which is about the how. And here you see a classification tree, which we can all read if we understand the basics. And this is a test design from a customer of mine. Here you see some terms, and these are the things, the conditions you need to test. And the great thing about if you do test designs, they are usually restricted to only a few pages. And you know what the great thing about a few pages is? You can review a few pages highly effectively. And test cases written, documented, which are very difficult to review. So I like to say, before we move to test cases, think, identify, and document in a easy way, what are the things that we need to test here? What are the test conditions? As I said already, I'm a big fan of what I call test design startup meetings, where you sit together with a developer, with a business analyst and a tester and think, I need to test this feature. So what are the interesting parts to test? Of course, a test design startup meeting is always a good idea. But when does it matter most? For those features that are most risky, that are most important. But I would like to say to you, have a look at test design startup. Sit together before you start documenting and start moving into the next steps. Listen to the developer, because he will tell you, these are parts I'm not really sure about. Listen to a business analyst. What the things are most important. Have a brainstorm session. 15 minutes, 30 minutes is all it takes. And it will make your testing much more effective. Exploratory testing, I said already, is I'm not going to explain all of this in this slide. Also looking at time briefly, but I think there's a number of things that make exploratory testing different to error guessing. First of all, we have in the beginning a charter, like a one-pager, if you want, where it says, these are the things to test. It's like your test design, your test ideas for this session. Again, a session is done in pairs. Someone executing a test and the other one taking notes. Taking notes, that means we are documenting what we're doing. Different to error guessing. There is at the end of the day usually a sort of debriefing where you sit together with all the testers and say, what did we find today? How can we learn? There are checklists available. Again, I'm not going to explain everything about this slide. The focus should be, don't use exploratory testing as an excuse to do error guessing. Study what exploratory testing is all about. Look at session-based testing. And then do it in the right way. Because if you do it right, this is very, 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 very powerful. And the last one, so number 5, risk-based we talked about. Reviews is something to look into. Unit testing, test design is people. A nice statement from Mr. Myers, The Art of Software Testing from 1979. Testing is an extremely complex, intellectual, challenging task. People over processes, or nicely speaking, individuals over interactions, and interactions over processes and tools, build experienced and skilled testers. Train the people. And training doesn't mean send them training courses, train them on the job. Share experiences. But also look at that team dynamics, building the right team. But I mean about train the testers, I mean train those who are testing. That's those who are testers, who are QA persons. But also a business analyst may be testing. A UAT tester may be testing. A developer may be testing. I don't know. These to me are all testers at a certain point in time and need to be trained. So invest in this. And to me, as I said already, tester skills, not only for testers. We talk about T-shaped persons, where you say on one hand you have deep knowledge. So a tester today knows testing. But we also expect a tester to know about development, something like scripting, something like requirements, something about configuration management. We also talk about domain aspects. So he understands the users. He understands the business. I said already, I worked for a while at Philips Healthcare. And at healthcare, every tester is sent to hospital twice a year. Not because they're ill, but to observe how their machine is being used in practice. From this, you learn to make better test cases. So domain knowledge and soft skills, communication, the right mindset, presentation skills, open-mindedness, all these things together. This to me is a tester. And this is not trained only through courses. There's workshops, there's coaching, all the things together. But I think tester skills, I've seen organizations that are consistently investing in training people, in coaching people, in sharing, in having monthly meetings, for instance. What's interesting, say, hey, I've done this now. I've been to Erik from Veenendaal, and I've done a test design startup meeting for the first time. Organize a session. Share your experiences. That's training. And other things we talk about people factor is job satisfaction. I like the fact that adequate rewards. If you want to give something to someone because it's his birthday, because there's so many marriage anniversary or whatever, invest some time in the person. Don't just buy him a bottle of wine. Maybe he doesn't drink. That's showing that you're interested in the people. Test guild. Very popular in the Agile domain, where you have best practices being shared. You have meetings, you have weekly stand-ups by testers only. Think about career paths, motivation. And also think about team dynamics. It's one thing I could talk about for an hour easily. What we're seeing today is we're building agile teams, and we're building them typically by technical skills only. These are people. They are different. And building a right team makes, you need someone who's, we call a moderate evaluator in well-being context. Someone who is a finisher. You need someone who has a lot of resources somewhere. You need to make a balanced team. The correct attitude if you want. And I think many times, this is not part of how teams are built. Only the tester. There's a test. Only the developer. There's a developer. Think about what personality does the developer have? What personality does the tester have? Do they fit together? Are they complementary? Build teams. Build effective teams. To summarize, I think these 5, if you invest your time, your resource in these 5 things, you can make a difference. Theory versus practice. Set clear priorities. Clear testing priorities. Priorities that all of us understand in a project, in a team. Risk-based. Use reviews. On parts where it's really necessary. But do them effectively. Invest some time in understanding what reviews mean. Don't just send out an email and say, have a look. That doesn't make much sense. Get developers doing unit testing. But also give them the right training, the right tooling. Think about independence in that level. Extreme programming. Test techniques are a great idea. They're being taught in many, many courses. But use them as a tool to find more defects. Consider steps like test design. Consider doing a test design startup meeting. Think about exploratory testing in the right way. And finally, build, invest in having the right people, experienced and skilled testers, and those who are performing a testing role. And experienced and skilled testers is not just sending them to a training course. That's a consistent, if you want, approach. And if you do this well, I think you'll be able to survive in most projects and probably become the, I would say, local Superman. What does this mean? We started up with the statement, no more testers. I think we are facing a time where things are getting more and more challenging. So I would say no more testers, or, which is my statement, there has never been a time where software testers were needed more. Thank you very much.
Wow, thanks very much, Erik. It was a great talk. Let's see if we can get some of these questions answered here. I've got a question for you. I was wondering, you mentioned about the soft skills for testers. And are there specific soft skills for testers, or are they just general soft skills that we all need to work on?
There are some I think specific soft skills. Whether they're soft skills or not, and you can argue about it. But I think being able to look at things very critically, but yet with a positive mindset, is something expected from testers. It's also being open-minded towards new technologies and not defensively. It's having an eagerness to learn because new things are happening all the time. So there are, I think, very specific things for a tester, in addition to, I think, more general things. You need to be able to communicate, to talk, to present, which is more like a common, if you want, soft skill. But there are specifics in that area as well, I think, yeah. So the answer is both, if you want.
Okay. Okay, well, I don't see one more question in from the audience. Agile at scale, is that really different than from other SDLC approaches, for very large projects, Agile at scale? How is that different than traditional SDLC approaches?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I always try to be not too negative. But if I look at things like SAFe, which is the Agile framework for that, it comes across to me as that at the lowest level we do things very agile, And the bigger we get, the more we move back to organize it very much in a, let's say, more or less traditional way. And my statements is for the whole Agile is, I think we're doing is, at least there are communities that try to define as much as possible for the Agile lifecycle. But to me, that's not Agile. As I said in the beginning already, Agile should be, yes, there are life cycles you can use, fine. But have the right mindset and all the time look at what I'm doing now. Is this lean? Is there waste involved? Does it provide business value? And if you work in that way, then of course, SAFe can be a good model. V model can be right. The Agile Scrum can be right, but it's not about Scrum. It's not about SAFe. It's not about traditional life cycles. It's about having the right mindset and anything which is in there, considering how much business value does it have? Does it create anything which has to do with waste? Am I as lean as possible? I think this is what it is. And just following SAFe, with all due respect, often leads to I would call them non-agile type of organizations, although they feel different themselves.
Okay, thanks very much. I got one more question, and then we'll split up and go into our different tracks. The next question is, how do you handle or work with a developer that says they don't do testing?
Yeah, it's a good one. Sometimes it's about convincing, talking. It's also what I've seen is I've worked on a project. Let me give another story. Where we have a number of, let's say, old, I'm not saying Brian 55 is old, but old developers, and we had some younger developers fresh from university. And in this case, we tried to implement unit testing. And the older ones were saying, "Oh, we know it. We don't need that." And we made pairs from a younger person who wanted to try everything new with the older guy, and they had to work together. We also important, gave them a coverage tool. It wasn't even a freeware tool at the time. So, and as a result, what happened is that the older ones were inspired by the new ones because they showed things. But also, I think a coverage tool can make a difference. Because if you do testing and then you think, I'm done, and the tool tells you, actually, you've only got 20% statement coverage. There's not many developers who then say, I'm happy. But this is the first time they get the message back from a tool, and tools are nice because they're technical, so I like working with them. So there are ways around that. It's not easy. I'm not saying if it was easy, we would all been doing it. But I believe, by the way, that most developers want quality as much as testers. That's my personal vision. We just need to train them, explain to them, and support them much more.